The desert sun had already scorched the earth bone dry when Nora Raines made her first trip to the creek that morning. 2 wooden buckets balanced on a yoke across her narrow shoulders, and she knew before the day ended she would make that walk 7 more times. The year was 1878, and Salida, Colorado sat in a valley where water meant survival, where every drop counted, and where a woman alone had to prove herself worthy of breathing the same air as everyone else. Nora had been carrying water for 3 years now, ever since her father died in a mining accident up in the mountains, and left her with nothing but a small plot of land on the outskirts of town and a stubborn determination to survive. She was 22 years old with dark hair that she kept pinned back in a practical bun and hands that had grown calloused and strong from work most women never had to do. The townspeople whispered about her, about how she refused to marry, about how she kept to herself, about how she walked those 3 miles to the creek and back again like some kind of penance. The truth was simpler than their gossip. Nora carried water because she had no choice. Her land sat high and dry, away from the creek that fed most of the other homesteads, and the well her father had started digging remained unfinished, a dark hole in the ground that mocked her every time she passed it. She had tried to finish it herself, but the rock was too hard, the task too great for one person working alone with basic tools, so she carried water. Every morning before dawn, every evening after the sun began its descent. Sometimes more often if the heat was particularly brutal. Her back had grown strong, her legs steady, her resolve harder than the Colorado rock beneath her feet. It was on one of these trips on a Tuesday morning in late July that everything changed. Nora had just bent to fill her buckets when she heard the horse approaching. She straightened slowly, one hand instinctively moving to the knife she kept at her belt. A woman alone learned to be cautious. The rider came into view around the bend in the creek, and Nora felt her breath catch despite herself. He sat tall in the saddle, a man probably in his mid-20s with sun-bronzed skin and dark hair that curled slightly at the edges beneath his hat. He wore the practical clothes of a working cowboy, dusty from the trail, and his horse was a fine-looking roan that moved with the easy grace of an animal well cared for, but it was his eyes that struck her most. Even from a distance she could see they were a startling blue, and when they landed on her they held a mixture of surprise and something else she could not quite name. "Morning," he said, his voice carrying easily across the quiet morning air. He touched the brim of his hat with 2 fingers, a gesture of respect that Nora had not seen directed at her in longer than she could remember. "Morning," she replied, her tone careful and neutral. She turned back to her buckets, hoping he would simply water his horse and move on. Instead, she heard the creak of leather as he dismounted. His boots crunched on the rocky ground as he led his horse to the water downstream from where she was filling her containers. "That is a long walk," he said after a moment, and Nora glanced up to find him watching her with those impossibly blue eyes. "Carrying water from here to anywhere." "I manage," Nora said curtly. She did not need pity, especially not from a stranger. "I did not mean to offend," he said quickly, and she heard genuine apology in his voice. "I only meant it looks like hard work." "Most things worth doing are," Nora replied. She finished filling the second bucket and lifted the yoke, settling it across her shoulders with practiced ease. The weight pulled at her immediately, but she had long ago learned to ignore the strain. "Where are you headed?" the stranger asked. Nora hesitated, then decided there was no harm in answering. "My place, about 3 miles west." His eyebrows rose. 3 miles? Carrying that?" "Twice a day, sometimes more," Nora said, and she could not quite keep the pride from her voice. Let him think what he wanted. She survived, and that was more than many could say. The stranger was quiet for a moment, studying her with an intensity that made her uncomfortable. Then he seemed to come to some kind of decision. "My name is Thomas Dalton," he said. "My friends call me Tom." "Nora Raines," she replied automatically, then wondered why she had given him her name at all. "Miss Raines, I am looking for work in these parts. I am good with my hands, can do most anything that needs doing on a ranch or homestead. Would you happen to know if anyone around here is hiring? Nora shifted the weight of the yoke slightly. You might try the Double R Ranch about 5 miles north. They're always looking for hands. Or the Miller place south of town. Thomas nodded slowly, but his eyes drifted to the buckets she carried, then back to her face. What about you? What about me? Do you have work that needs doing? Nora laughed, a short, harsh sound. I can barely feed myself, Mr. Dalton. I certainly cannot afford to pay hired help. What if I worked for room and board, Thomas said, and maybe a small wage when you could afford it? Nora stared at him, suspicion rising sharp and immediate. Why would you do that? Thomas looked out across the creek, his jaw working as if he was choosing his words carefully. When he spoke, his voice was quiet but firm. I have been riding for 3 weeks looking for a place to settle. I am tired of drifting. I want to build something, to have a home. And I figure helping someone who clearly works as hard as you do would be a good place to start. You do not know anything about me, Nora said. I know you carry water 3 miles twice a day. I know you are doing it alone. I know you have not asked anyone for help. He turned those blue eyes back to her. That tells me plenty. Nora wanted to say no. Every instinct screamed at her to refuse, to protect herself, to maintain the careful distance she had built between herself and the rest of the world. But she also knew an opportunity when she saw one, and the list of things that needed doing on her property was longer than her arm. There is an unfinished well, she heard herself say. My father started it before he died. If you could finish it, I would not need to carry water anymore. Thomas smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and somehow more real. Then that is where I will start. They walked back to her property together, Thomas leading his horse while Nora carried her burden. He did not offer to take the buckets from her, and she was grateful for that. She had her pride, after all. But he did walk at her pace, never rushing, never complaining about the slow progress. He told her about himself as they walked. He was 26 years old, originally from Texas, where his family had run cattle until a hard winter, and bad luck had wiped them out 5 years ago. His parents had died of fever the following spring, and he had been on his own ever since, working where he could, learning what he needed to survive. Why Colorado? Nora asked. Heard there were opportunities here. Mining, ranching, land for the taking if a man was willing to work for it. He glanced at her. Seems like that applies to women too. Some of us do not have a choice, Nora said. Maybe, Thomas agreed. But I have known plenty of people who did have choices and still chose to give up. You did not. Nora did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing. Her property, when they reached it, was modest by any standard. A small cabin her father had built. A barn that was more hope than structure. A chicken coop with 6 hens and the unfinished well sitting like an accusation in the middle of the yard. But the land itself was good, with views of the mountains to the west and enough flat ground for crops if she could ever get water to them. Thomas surveyed it all with a careful eye, then nodded as if satisfied. You have got good bones here, just need some finishing. That is one way to put it, Nora said dryly. She showed him the well, explained what her father had planned, how deep he had estimated they would need to go. Thomas crouched at the edge, peering down into the darkness, then picked up one of the abandoned tools and examined it. I can do this, he said. It will take time, maybe a few weeks, but I can do it. The barn has a spare stall where you can sleep, Nora said, making her decision. I will feed you what I eat, which is not much, but it is honest food. If you can finish the well and help me with some other repairs, we will call it even. Thomas stood and extended his hand. You have got yourself a deal, Miss Raines. Nora shook his hand, his grip firm and calloused like her own. Call me Nora. Then you should call me Tom. That first day set the pattern for the days that followed. Nora woke before dawn and made the walk to the creek while Tom tended to his horse and prepared his tools. When she returned, he would already be down in the well, the sound of metal striking rock echoing across the yard. She would go about her other work, tending the chickens, mending fences, working the small vegetable garden she struggled to keep alive with her limited water supply. At midday, she would call down to him and they would eat together in the shade of the cabin, simple meals of bread and whatever else she had managed to scrape together. Tom never complained about the food, never acted like he expected more. Instead, he asked her questions about the land, about her plans, about what she hoped to build. At first, Nora kept her answers short and guarded. She was not used to talking to people, and she certainly was not used to someone genuinely seeming to care about what she thought. But Tom had a way of listening that made her want to talk, a way of asking questions that showed he actually cared about the answers. In the evenings after her second trip to the creek, they would work together on smaller projects. They repaired the chicken coop, replaced rotted boards on the barn, fixed the door that never quite hung straight. Tom worked with the easy competence of someone who had spent his life solving problems with his hands, and Nora found herself watching him more than she probably should. The problem was that Tom was easy to watch. The way he moved, all lean strength and careful precision. The way he would push his hat back when he was thinking, revealing those startling blue eyes. The way he smiled at her when she made a dry observation about something, like he appreciated her particular brand of humor. Nora tried not to think about it. She had survived 3 years alone by not letting herself want things she could not have, and Tom Dalton was definitely in that category. He was helping her because he needed a place to stay and she needed help. Once the well was finished, he would move on to a real job with real pay, and she would go back to being alone. It was better that way, she told herself. Safer. But as the days turned into weeks, Nora found her carefully constructed walls beginning to crack. It happened in small moments. The way Tom brought her wildflowers one morning, claiming he had found them on his way back from checking his horse, but she suspected he had actually walked out of his way to pick them. The way he started anticipating what she needed before she asked for it, handing her tools or holding boards steady without being told. The way he looked at her sometimes when he thought she was not watching. His expression soft and wondering. And then there were the bigger moments, like the afternoon when Nora lost her footing on the walk back from the creek and fell hard, the bucket spilling everywhere and her ankle twisting beneath her. Tom had been working on the barn roof and saw it happen. He climbed down so fast she was afraid he would fall himself, running across the yard to reach her. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his hands hovering over her like he wanted to help but was not sure how. "I am fine," Nora said automatically, trying to stand, and then gasping as pain shot through her ankle. "You are not fine," Tom said firmly. Before she could protest, he scooped her up in his arms like she weighed nothing and started carrying her toward the cabin. "Put me down," Nora said, but her voice lacked conviction. The truth was, being in his arms felt startlingly good. Safe? Cared for? Things she had not felt in so long she had almost forgotten what they were like. "Not until we get that ankle looked at," Tom said. He carried her into the cabin and set her gently on the bed, then knelt in front of her and carefully removed her boot. His hands were gentle as he examined her ankle, his touch sending shivers through her that had nothing to do with pain. "It is not broken," he said after a moment, "but it is swollen. You need to stay off it for a few days." "I cannot," Nora said. "The water." "I will get the water," Tom interrupted. "And before you argue, remember that you hired me to help. This is helping." Nora wanted to argue, but the throbbing in her ankle and the determined look on Tom's face told her it would be pointless. "Fine, but just until it is healed." "Just until it is healed," Tom agreed. But the smile on his face suggested he knew something she did not. For the next 4 days, Tom did everything. He carried the water, tended the animals, made the meals, and still found time to work on the well. Nora watched from the cabin window, frustrated by her forced inactivity and increasingly aware of how much she had come to depend on his presence. It was dangerous, this growing attachment. She knew it was. But knowing something and being able to stop it were two very different things. On the 4th evening, Tom came in from his final trip to the creek and found Nora sitting at the table, her ankle propped up like he had insisted. How does it feel? He asked, setting the buckets down. Better, Nora admitted. I think I can walk on it tomorrow. Tom nodded, then surprised her by sitting down across from her instead of heading out to the barn like he usually did. He seemed to be struggling with something, his jaw working and his hands restless on the table. Nora, he finally said, can I ask you something? Of course. Why did your father build out here, so far from water? Nora was quiet for a moment, remembering. He wanted to be away from town, away from people who judged him for marrying my mother. Why would they judge him for that? Because my mother was Apache, Nora said quietly. Or half Apache, anyway. Her mother was from one of the bands that lived in these mountains. Her father was a trapper. She grew up between two worlds, never quite fitting in either one. Tom was silent, but his eyes never left her face, encouraging her to continue. My father loved her anyway, married her anyway, but it made things hard. People in town would not do business with him, would not treat him fair. So he bought this land, out where no one would bother them, and he tried to make a life here. Nora looked down at her hands. My mother died when I was 12. Sickness. My father never really recovered. He threw himself into trying to make this place work, into digging that well so we would not have to go to town for anything. And then the accident happened, and I was alone. You are not alone now, Tom said softly. Nora looked up and found him watching her with an expression that made her heart race. Tom, I need to tell you something, he said. I'm not just staying to finish the well. I am going to finish it, but that is not why I am staying. Then why? Nora whispered, afraid of the answer and hoping for it all at once. Because somewhere between that first morning at the creek and now I fell in love with you, Tom said. I love your strength. I love your stubbornness. I love the way you never complain, never ask for help, but still somehow make me want to give it. I love the way you look at your land like you are daring it to defeat you. I love you, Nora Raines, and I need you to know that before this goes any further. Nora felt tears sting her eyes. You should not. I have nothing to offer you. This place is barely getting by. I am barely getting by. You are offering me what I have wanted for 5 years and thought I would never find, Tom said. He reached across the table and took her hand. A home, a purpose, someone to build something with. What if I cannot give you what you need? Nora asked, her voice breaking on the words. Then we will figure it out together, Tom said. That is what people do when they love each other. They figure it out. Nora squeezed his hand, letting the tears fall freely now. I am scared. So am I, Tom admitted, but I would rather be scared with you than safe without you. Nora laughed, a watery sound that was half sob. That is possibly the most foolish thing anyone has ever said to me. Probably, Tom agreed. He stood up and came around the table, kneeling beside her chair. But I mean every word. I love you, Nora. And if you will have me, I want to stay. Not as hired help, as a partner, as someone building a life with you. Nora looked down at him, at this man who had appeared in her life like an answer to a prayer she had been too proud to speak, and felt something break open inside her chest. All the walls she had built, all the careful distance she had maintained, all the reasons she had given herself for why she had to stay alone, they all crumbled under the weight of what she saw in his eyes. I love you too, she whispered. I did not want to. I tried not to, but I do. Tom smiled, that brilliant, transforming smile, and pulled her into his arms. Nora went willingly, burying her face in his shoulder and breathing in the scent of him, sun and sweat, and something fundamentally good. We are going to make this work, Tom said into her hair. I promise you, Nora. I am going to make sure you never have to carry water alone again. 2 weeks later, on a bright August morning, Tom struck water in the well. Nora heard him shouting from inside the cabin and came running, her ankle now fully healed. She reached the well just as Tom climbed out, soaking wet and grinning like a madman. Water! he shouted, grabbing her and spinning her around. "Nora, we have got water!" Nora laughed, the sound of it surprising even herself. Pure joy, unguarded and bright. Tom set her down and kissed her, right there in the middle of the yard, and Nora kissed him back with all the emotion she had been holding in for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Tom cupped her face in his hands. "Marry me." "What?" Nora said, sure she had heard wrong. "Marry me," Tom repeated. "I know it is fast. I know we have only known each other a few weeks, but I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Marry me, Nora." Nora thought about all the reasons she should say no. It was too fast. They barely knew each other. Marriage was a risk, a commitment, 1,000 ways things could go wrong, but she also thought about the way he looked at her, the way he listened to her, the way he had spent weeks breaking his back to finish a well so she would not have to carry water anymore, the way he made her laugh, the way he made her hope. "Yes," she said. "Yes, I will marry you." They were wed 3 days later by the minister in town, with 2 witnesses pulled from the general store and a simple gold band that Tom bought with the last of his savings. Nora wore her mother's dress, carefully preserved all these years, and Tom wore a new shirt he had bought for the occasion. The townspeople who saw them whispered, of course, about how fast it was happening, about how Tom barely knew her, about how Nora Raines had always been strange, always been different, and now she had trapped some poor cowboy into marrying her. But Nora did not care. For the first time in her life, she had found someone who looked at her and saw not a burden or a curiosity or something to be pitied, but simply someone worth loving. They spent their wedding night in the cabin, and Tom was gentle and patient, and everything Nora had secretly hoped for but never expected to have. Afterward, lying in his arms with the moonlight streaming through the window, Nora felt a peace settle over her that she had not known since before her father died. "What are you thinking?" Tom asked, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her bare shoulder. "That I am happy," Nora said. "I did not think I would ever be able to say that again." Tom kissed the top of her head. "Get used to it. I plan on making sure you say it often." The months that followed were some of the hardest and best of Nora's life. With the well finished, they turned their attention to the rest of the property. Tom used his skills and connections to find work with some of the nearby ranches, earning money they could put back into their own place. Nora expanded the garden now that they had water to spare and started selling vegetables in town. It was not easy. There were days when the work seemed endless, when the money ran short, when Nora wondered if they had been foolish to think they could make this work. But Tom was always there, steady and sure, and together they kept moving forward. The townspeople slowly began to accept them. Some never would, Nora knew, but others started to see what Tom had seen from the beginning, that Nora was not strange or different or something to be pitied. She was simply a woman who worked hard and asked for nothing she had not earned. The first winter was brutal. Colorado winters always were, but that year seemed particularly harsh. Snow piled high around the cabin, and there were days when they could not leave at all. But the well kept producing clean, fresh water, and they had stocked enough supplies to see them through. During those long winter nights, curled up by the fire with Tom's arms around her, Nora told him stories her mother had told her. Stories of the mountains, of the people who had lived there long before the settlers came, of traditions and beliefs that were slowly being lost. Tom listened to every word, asking questions, remembering details, treating her mother's heritage with the respect Nora had so rarely seen from others. "I wish I could have met her," Tom said one night, "your mother." "She would have liked you," Nora said. "She always said the measure of a man was in how he treated those who could do nothing for him. You would have passed her test." "What about your father?" Nora smiled. "He would have pretended to be stern and intimidating, then would have talked your ear off about his plans for this place. He had so many dreams for what it could become." "Then we will make them come true," Tom said, "for him, for your mother, for us." As winter gave way to spring, they put those words into action. They repaired the barn properly, adding stalls for the animals as Tom planned to buy. They planted twice as much garden as the year before. They cleared more land, preparing it for crops. And in the evenings, exhausted but satisfied, they would sit on the porch Tom had built and watch the sun set over the mountains. It was on one of those evenings in late May that Nora told Tom she was pregnant. She had suspected for a few weeks, but had waited to be sure before saying anything. Now, watching the play of emotions across Tom's face, shock giving way to joy, giving way to fierce protectiveness, she was glad she had waited. This moment was too precious to waste. "A baby," Tom said, his voice hushed and wondering. "We are having a baby." "We are," Nora confirmed. "Probably sometime in late November or early December." Tom pulled her into his arms, holding her like she was made of glass. "I am going to take care of you," he said fiercely. "Both of you. I swear it, Nora. You will never have to struggle again." "We will take care of each other," Nora corrected gently. "That is how this works." The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and Nora found herself exhausted in ways she had never been before. But Tom was true to his word. He took over the harder physical labor, insisting she rest more, bringing her water throughout the day from the well he had dug just so she would not have to carry it. The irony was not lost on Nora. The woman who had once carried water for miles now had it brought to her by someone who loved her enough to make sure she never had to strain herself. Some morning she woke up and still could not quite believe it was real. The townspeople's attitudes continued to soften, especially as Nora's pregnancy became obvious. Women who had once crossed the street to avoid her started offering advice, sharing remedies for morning sickness, knitting small garments for the baby. It was not universal acceptance, but it was something, and Nora was grateful for it. In September, Tom was offered a permanent position as foreman on one of the larger ranches in the area. The pay was good, better than anything he had made so far, and it came with the understanding that he could still work his own land when needed. He accepted immediately, seeing it as a way to secure their future and provide for the child who would arrive soon. Nora worried about him working so hard, but Tom seemed energized rather than exhausted by it all. He had found what he had been looking for, that sense of purpose and home he had ridden so far to find. Every fence he mended, every dollar he earned, every improvement he made to their property was done with a fierce joy that Nora found both inspiring and humbling. The baby came on a cold December night, 3 weeks earlier than expected, and in the middle of a snowstorm that made getting help impossible. Tom delivered his son himself, with Nora guiding him through what needed to be done, her voice steady even when the pain was at its worst. When it was over, when their son was cleaned and wrapped and placed in Nora's arms, Tom sat beside them on the bed with tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," he whispered, touching one tiny hand with a finger that seemed impossibly large by comparison. "Nora, he is perfect." "He needs a name," Nora said, studying the small face with wonder. She had grown this person inside her, but seeing him here, separate and real, was still almost impossible to comprehend. "What about Theodore?" Tom suggested, "after my father." "Theodore Dalton," Nora said, testing the name. "Teddy." "And his middle name should be Joseph," Tom added, "after your father." Nora looked up at him, her eyes filling with tears. "You would do that?" "Of course I would," Tom said. "He was part of building this place, part of what made you who you are. Our son should carry his name." "Theodore Joseph Dalton," Nora said. She looked down at the sleeping baby in her arms. "Welcome home, Teddy." The winter months with the newborn were exhausting, but somehow also magical. Nora had never been around babies much and found herself learning alongside Tom how to care for this small, demanding person they had created. There were sleepless nights and moments of panic when Teddy would not stop crying and they had no idea what was wrong. But there were also moments of pure perfection, like when Teddy first smiled at Tom, or when Nora woke in the night to find Tom walking the floor with their son, singing some old Texas lullaby in a soft, off-key voice. As Teddy grew, so did their lives. Tom's work as foreman meant steady money and respect in the community. Nora's garden became known as the best in the area, and she started selling not just vegetables, but also herbs and remedies she had learned from her mother. They added chickens, then goats, then a few head of cattle. The homestead that had once been a struggling survival became a thriving operation. But the most important changes were the ones that happened inside the cabin. The laughter that filled the rooms, the sense of family that permeated every corner, the love that grew deeper with each passing day. On the second anniversary of the day they met at the creek, Tom surprised Nora by leading her outside at dawn. There, next to the well that had changed both their lives, he had built a small bench where they could sit together and watch the sunrise. "I wanted to mark the spot," Tom said, his arm around Nora's shoulders as Teddy played at their feet. "The place where everything began." "When you saw me carrying water," Nora said. "When I saw the strongest, most stubborn, most beautiful woman I had ever met, refusing to give up no matter what," Tom corrected. "When I saw my future, even if I did not know it yet." Nora leaned her head on his shoulder, watching the sun paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. "I was so angry that day. Angry at the world, at my situation, at having to carry those buckets again, and then you appeared and everything changed." "I am glad I was there," Tom said. "I am glad I saw you. I am glad I was foolish enough to offer to work for a woman I did not know, on a homestead that barely had enough to feed one person, let alone two." "Foolish," Nora agreed, smiling, "but also brave and kind, and exactly what I needed, even though I did not know it." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Teddy discover a butterfly and try to follow it on unsteady legs. The well behind them made a soft gurgling sound as water flowed through the mechanism Tom had built to bring it to the surface. Nora no longer had to lower a bucket and haul it up by hand. She just turned a handle, and clean water poured into whatever container she held beneath the spout. "Do you ever miss it?" Tom asked suddenly. "Miss what?" "The carrying. The independence of doing everything yourself." Nora thought about it seriously, as the question deserved. "Sometimes," she admitted, "there was a kind of pride in it, knowing I could survive alone. But I do not miss the loneliness. I do not miss the exhaustion. I do not miss feeling like I had to prove myself every single day just to justify my existence." She turned to look at him. "What we have now is so much better than anything I had then." "We are going to have more," Tom said. "I have been saving, and I think by next spring we can buy that section of land to the south, the one with the creek running through it." Nora's eyes widened. "Tom, that land is expensive." "We can afford it," Tom said confidently. "Between my salary and your sales, plus what we have been saving, we can make it work. And then we will have our own water source right on our property. We can expand, maybe bring in more cattle, maybe even hire help of our own." "From barely surviving to hiring help," Nora said wonderingly. "How did we get here?" "Hard work," Tom said, "and luck and love. Mostly love." Teddy chose that moment to stumble and fall, letting out an indignant wail. Nora stood to comfort him, but Tom was faster, scooping their son up and tossing him gently into the air until the wails turned to giggles. Watching them together, Nora felt her heart swell with an emotion so large she had no name for it. This was her family. This was her home. This was the life she had built, not in spite of her hardships, but because of them. Every bucket of water she had carried, every lonely night, every moment of doubt and fear, they had all led her to this moment. "Thank you," she said softly. Tom looked over at her. Teddy now settled on his hip. "For what?" "For seeing me," Nora said. "For looking at a woman carrying water and seeing someone worth staying for." Tom crossed to her and kissed her, soft and sweet, with Teddy giggling between them. "Best decision I ever made." The years continued to unfold like a well-worn map, each one bringing new challenges and new joys. They bought the land with the creek, just as Tom had planned. They expanded their herd and built a proper ranch house, larger than the cabin but incorporating it as part of the structure so they never forgot where they started. Teddy grew strong and curious, learning to ride almost before he could walk properly, following Tom everywhere like a small shadow. When Teddy was 3, Nora became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect, perhaps because she was not also struggling to survive. Their daughter was born on a warm spring morning, with Teddy peeking around the doorway to get his first glimpse of his sister. They named her Clara Rose. Clara after Tom's mother and Rose after the wildflowers that bloomed on the hills every spring. She had Nora's dark hair and Tom's blue eyes, and from the moment she was born she had both of them wrapped around her tiny fingers. Watching Tom with their children, Nora was constantly amazed by the depth of his love and patience. He never raised his voice in anger, never struck them, never treated them as anything less than the precious miracles they were. He taught Teddy to rope and ride, to care for animals, to fix things that broke. He taught Clara to be brave and curious, to ask questions and expect answers, to never let anyone tell her she could not do something simply because she was a girl. And through it all, Tom made sure Nora knew she was loved, not just as the mother of his children or the person who ran his household, but as herself. He would surprise her with small gifts, wildflowers picked on the way home from work, a ribbon for her hair bought in town, a moment stolen away from the children for a kiss that reminded them both of why they had fallen in love. The town of Salada continued to grow around them. More people moved in, drawn by the mining opportunities in the mountains and the rich land in the valley. Some of the newcomers looked at Nora with the same suspicion the old-timers once had, but it mattered less now. She had her place, her family, her purpose. The opinions of strangers held little weight. Instead, Nora found herself becoming a resource for other women, particularly those who were struggling. She remembered what it was like to be alone and desperate, and she made sure anyone who needed help knew they could come to her. She shared seeds from her garden, remedies from her mother's teachings, advice about surviving in a hard land. She gave freely of what she had because she remembered what it was like to have nothing. Tom supported her in this completely. When a widow with 3 children showed up at their door one winter, having been turned away from the boarding house in town, Tom immediately offered them space in the barn and work to earn their keep. When a young woman arrived in town fleeing an abusive husband, Nora took her in despite the gossip it caused, and Tom made sure everyone knew the woman was under their protection. "We were given a second chance," Tom said when Nora asked him why he was always so willing to help. "Both of us. You could have told me no that day at the creek. I could have ridden past without stopping. But we both took the risk, and look what we got. How can we not offer the same to others?" By the time Teddy was 10 and Clara was 7, the Dalton Ranch was one of the most successful in the area. They employed several hands year-round and more during busy seasons. They had a reputation for fair dealing and good stock. And they had something else too, something money could not buy. A family that loved each other deeply and completely. It was during this time that Nora's past came back in an unexpected way. A woman appeared in town one day asking for Nora Raines, the daughter of Joseph Raines and his Apache wife. Nora went to meet her, curious and cautious, and found a woman about her own age with features that reminded Nora of her mother. Her name was Sarah, and she was Nora's cousin, the daughter of her mother's sister. She had been searching for Nora for years, ever since her own mother died, and told her about the family she had never known. "Your mother was special," Sarah told Nora over coffee in the ranch house. "My mother always regretted losing touch with her after she married your father, but the distance was too great, and travel was hard, and then the years just slipped away." Nora listened with tears in her eyes as Sarah shared stories about her mother, about the grandmother Nora had never known, about traditions and history that Nora had thought lost forever. Tom sat beside her, holding her hand, while Teddy and Clara listened with wide eyes to tales of the people and places that were part of their heritage. Sarah stayed for 3 weeks, and by the time she left, Nora had gained not just a cousin but a connection to a part of herself she had thought was gone. They promised to write, to visit when they could, to make sure the next generation knew where they came from. After Sarah left, Tom found Nora sitting by the well, crying quietly. "What is wrong?" he asked, sitting beside her and pulling her into his arms. Nothing is wrong, Nora said, wiping at her tears. Everything is right. More right than I ever thought possible. I have you, I have our children, I have this place, and now I have family again, people who remember my mother, and can tell our children about where they come from. It is too much. I do not know how to hold all this happiness. You do not have to hold it alone, Tom reminded her. That is what I'm here for. We hold it together. Nora turned in his arms and kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. Tom kissed her back with the same intensity, even after all these years, even with the gray starting to show at his temples and the lines that hard work had etched on both their faces. I love you, Nora said when they finally broke apart. I do not say it enough. I love you, Tom Dalton. You gave me everything I never knew I needed. You gave me the same, Tom said, a home, a purpose, a family. You gave me you, Nora, and that was always more than enough. They sat together by the well as the sun set, watching Teddy and Clara play in the yard, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The well that Tom had dug with his own hands, the well that meant Nora never had to walk 3 miles carrying buckets again, burbled softly behind them. It had become a symbol for them, a reminder of where they started and how far they had come. But it was more than that, too. It was proof that some things worth having required digging deep, working hard, and refusing to give up even when the task seemed impossible. It was proof that the right person appearing at the right time could change everything. It was proof that love, real love, was about seeing someone's burdens and saying, I will help you carry these without being asked. The years continued their steady march. Teddy grew into a fine young man, tall like his father with his mother's determination. He took naturally to ranch work and showed signs of being an even better horseman than Tom. Clara became a spitfire, smart and sassy and utterly fearless. She could ride as well as any of the ranch hands and had opinions on everything from cattle breeding to politics. Tom and Nora watched their children grow with pride and occasional terror at how fast time was moving. They added a third child, another son they named Jack William, when Nora was 35. It was unexpected but welcome, and Jack brought a new energy to the household with his mischievous grin and boundless curiosity. He kept them all young, Tom liked to say. Running after a 5-year-old when you were in your 40s had a way of doing that. The ranch continued to prosper. They bought more land, added sheep to their operation, and built a second house for the foreman Tom hired to help manage everything. Nora's gardens expanded into a full commercial operation, with a crew of women working under her direction to grow and harvest herbs and vegetables that were sold throughout the territory. But prosperity never changed the core of who they were. Tom still worked alongside his ranch hands, never asking them to do anything he would not do himself. Nora still rose early to tend her gardens and her family, never too busy to help someone in need. They still made time for each other, stealing moments alone when they could, keeping the romance alive even amid the chaos of raising 3 children and running a successful ranch. It was on their 15th wedding anniversary that Tom surprised Nora with one final gift. He led her outside at dawn, just as he had years before, but this time he did not stop at the well. Instead, he led her down a new path he had carved through the trees to a spot overlooking the creek that now ran through their property. There, built into the hillside, was a small house. Just one room, but beautifully crafted, with windows that looked out over the water and a porch perfect for sitting and watching the world go by. "What is this?" Nora asked, stunned. "This is yours," Tom said. "A place where you can come when you need quiet, when you need space, when you just want to be alone with your thoughts. The kids are getting older, the ranch is busy, and I wanted you to have somewhere that is just yours." Nora walked slowly up onto the porch, running her hands over the smooth wood of the railing. Inside, she found a comfortable chair, a small desk, shelves for books, and a trunk that Tom had filled with writing supplies. "I thought maybe you could write down your stories," Tom said, coming up behind her. "The ones your mother told you, the ones Sarah shared, the story of how we started. So our children and their children will always know where they came from." Nora turned to face him, tears streaming freely now. How did I get so lucky? We both got lucky, Tom corrected. I just happened to be riding by a creek at the right time, and you happened to be stubborn enough to let a stranger help you. Best decision I ever made, Nora said, echoing his words from years ago. They stood together on the porch of the little house, Tom's arms around Nora's waist and her head resting against his chest. Below them, the creek burbled over rocks, the sound peaceful and constant. In the distance, they could see their ranch house, smoke rising from the chimney as the children started their day. Do you ever think about that morning at the creek? Tom asked. About what would have happened if I had just ridden past? Sometimes, Nora admitted. I think I would have survived. I always did. But I would never have lived, not really. You taught me the difference, Tom. You taught me that surviving is not the same as having a life worth living. You taught me too, Tom said. You taught me that strength is not about being hard. It is about being willing to be soft with the right person. You taught me that home is not a place. It is a person. You taught me what it means to truly love someone. Nora turned in his arms and kissed him deep and long and full of all the years they had shared and all the years still to come. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and smiling, Tom rested his forehead against hers. 15 years, he said, and I love you more now than I did the day I married you. 15 years, Nora repeated, and I'm just starting to believe I deserve this, deserve you. You deserve everything good this world has to offer, Tom said fiercely, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it. They stayed at the little house for a while, sitting together on the porch and talking about their memories, their children, their dreams for the future. When they finally headed back to the main house, walking hand in hand through the morning light, Nora felt a contentment so deep it seemed to settle into her very bones. She had come so far from that angry, lonely woman carrying water from the creek. She had become someone she never imagined she could be. Someone who loved and was loved, someone who had built not just a ranch, but a legacy. And it had all started because a cowboy with blue eyes and a kind heart had seen her struggling and decided to help. The years rolled on with their mixture of joy and sorrow. Tom's health began to falter when he was in his late 50s, his joints aching from decades of hard work. Nora tended him with the same fierce devotion he had always shown her, using remedies her mother had taught her and simply being there, holding his hand through the pain. Teddy was married now, to a smart young woman named Elizabeth who fit seamlessly into the family. They had given Nora and Tom 2 grandchildren, a boy and a girl who visited often and loved hearing stories about the old days. Clara had shocked everyone by becoming a teacher, riding into town 3 days a week to educate the children of miners and ranchers. Jack was still finding his way, working the ranch but with dreams of seeing more of the world before he settled down. The ranch itself was beyond anything they had imagined in those early days. Hundreds of acres, hundreds of head of cattle, a dozen employees, and a reputation that extended throughout Colorado and beyond. But the heart of it remained that original plot of land, the cabin now used for storage, the well still producing clean water. On a warm September evening, 40 years after that morning at the creek, Tom and Nora sat together on the porch he had built, watching the sun set over the mountains. Tom was 70 now, Nora 66, and both of them showed the marks of their years. But when Nora looked at him, she still saw the young cowboy who had offered to help a stranger. And when Tom looked at her, he still saw the strongest woman he had ever known. I have been thinking, Tom said, his voice a bit raspier than it once had been, but still warm and familiar, about what happens next. Tom, Nora started, not wanting to have this conversation. No, listen, Tom said gently. I'm not going anywhere soon, but I'm also not a fool. We are getting older, and I want to make sure you know something. What? Nora asked, taking his hand. That every day with you was worth it, Tom said. Every single day, even the hard ones, even the ones where we struggled, even the ones where everything went wrong. They were all worth it because I got to spend them with you. The feeling is mutual, Nora said, her voice thick with emotion. I want you to promise me something, Tom continued. When I am gone, and do not argue, we both know it will be me first. I am not as stubborn as you." Despite herself, Nora smiled. "I want you to promise me you will not stop living," Tom said. "You will not go back to just surviving. You will remember how to laugh, how to love, how to find joy in the small things. Promise me, Nora." "I promise," Nora said, tears sliding down her weathered cheeks. "But you have to promise me something too. Anything." "Promise me you will stick around for a good while longer," Nora said. "I'm not ready to lose you. I will never be ready." "I will do my best," Tom said, pulling her close. "For you, I will always do my best." But it was not Tom who passed first. The following spring, as Nora worked in her garden, she felt a sudden pain in her chest that drove her to her knees. Tom found her there, called for the doctor, stayed by her side as she fought to breathe. The doctor said her heart was failing, worn out from years of hard work and stress. He gave her medicines, told her to rest, but they all knew what it meant. Nora's body, after serving her so faithfully for so long, was giving out. Tom moved a bed into the main room so Nora could see out the windows, could watch the life of the ranch continue around her. He barely left her side, holding her hand, reading to her, telling her stories about their children and grandchildren. "This is not how it was supposed to go," Tom said one night, his voice breaking. "I was supposed to go first. You were supposed to keep thriving without me." "Life rarely goes how it is supposed to," Nora said. She was weak, but her mind was still sharp, her spirit still strong. "But that does not make it bad. I have had a good life, Tom, a better life than I ever dreamed possible, because of you." "You would have been fine without me," Tom insisted. "Maybe," Nora conceded, "but I would not have been happy. You gave me happiness, Tom, real, deep, lasting happiness, and I am grateful for every moment of it." The children came to say goodbye, Teddy and Elizabeth with their children, Clara setting aside her teaching to be there, Jack arriving from the neighboring ranch where he had been working. They gathered around Nora's bed, this family she and Tom had built, and told her how much they loved her, how much she had taught them, how her strength and determination had shaped them all. "Take care of your father," Nora told them, her voice barely above a whisper. "He is going to need you. And remember where you came from. Remember the stories. Pass them on to your children." "We will, Mother," Teddy promised, his own eyes wet. "We will remember everything." That night, after the children had reluctantly left to tend to their own families, Nora lay in Tom's arms, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "Do you remember that morning at the creek?" she asked. "Every detail," Tom said. "The way you looked so fierce and determined, the way you tried to hide how tired you were, the way something in my heart just knew you were going to change my life." "You changed mine first," Nora said. "You saw me, Tom, really saw me. Not as a burden or a curiosity, but as someone worth knowing, worth loving. You gave me that gift, and I have treasured it every day since." "I love you," Tom said, holding her tighter. "I have loved you from that first morning, and I will love you until my last breath and beyond." "I love you too," Nora whispered, "always." She died just before dawn, slipping away peacefully in Tom's arms. Her last breath was a sigh, a soft exhalation that seemed to carry all her love and gratitude out into the world. Tom held her for a long time after, unwilling to let go, knowing that when he did, his world would never be the same. The funeral was attended by nearly everyone in Salida and the surrounding ranches. Nora had touched many lives with her kindness and strength, and they came to pay their respects to a woman who had proven that determination and love could overcome any obstacle. Tom stood beside her grave, dry-eyed and hollow, listening to the minister speak words that seemed inadequate to describe what Nora had been. But when it was over, when everyone had offered their condolences and drifted away, Tom stayed. "You promised me you would keep living," he said to the freshly turned earth. "So now I am making the same promise to you. I will keep going. I will take care of our children and grandchildren. I will make sure your stories are told. But Nora, I want you to know that part of me died with you today. The best part. The part that knew how to hope and dream and believe in miracles. That part was always yours, and now it is gone with you. The days that followed were among the hardest of Tom's life. He went through the motions, taking care of the ranch, spending time with his children, but the light had gone out of everything. Food had no taste. The sunrises he and Nora had loved to watch together brought no joy. The bed was too big, the house too quiet, the world too empty without her in it. It was Clara who finally got through to him about 3 weeks after Nora's death. She found him sitting by the well, staring at nothing, and sat down beside him. "Mother would be angry with you," Clara said bluntly. Tom looked at her in surprise. "What?" "She would be angry," Clara repeated. "You are giving up. She never gave up a day in her life, and she would hate to see you doing it now." "Your mother was stronger than me," Tom said. "No, she was not," Clara said. "She told me once that you were her strength, that on the days she wanted to give up, she looked at you and found reasons to keep going. Now you have to do the same. Look at us, your children. Look at your grandchildren. Find your reasons to keep going." Tom was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "She made me promise I would keep living. Not just surviving, but living. I do not know how to do that without her." "None of us do," Clara said gently, "but we are going to figure it out together, as a family, the way Mother taught us." And slowly, painfully, Tom did. He started small, forcing himself to eat properly, to sleep in the bed instead of falling asleep in a chair. He spent more time with his grandchildren, teaching them to ride and rope the way he had taught their parents. He sat down with Teddy to discuss the future of the ranch, making plans that would carry them forward for another generation. And he read. Nora had written in those last years, filling journals with stories and memories, and Tom read every word. He laughed at her descriptions of their early days, cried at her accounts of the children growing up, felt his heart break all over again at her final entries, where she spoke about how grateful she was for the life they had built together. On what would have been their 41st wedding anniversary, Tom rode out to the little house he had built for Nora by the creek. He had not been there since she died, unable to face the memories, but on this day it felt important. The house was just as they had left it, preserved by the children who understood its significance. Tom sat in Nora's chair and looked out at the water, remembering all the times they had sat here together, talking and planning and simply being. "I miss you," he said out loud, not caring that there was no one to hear. "I miss you so much it feels like I cannot breathe sometimes. But I am trying, Nora. I am trying to keep my promise. I am trying to live." A breeze stirred the air, bringing with it the scent of the wildflowers Nora had loved. Tom breathed it in and felt, for the first time since her death, a small measure of peace. He understood now what Nora had been trying to tell him in those final days. Life was not about how long you lived, but about what you did with the time you had. Nora had packed more living into her 66 years than most people managed in twice that time. She had loved fiercely, worked tirelessly, and built something that would last long after she was gone. And she had taught him, a drifting cowboy with no place to call home, what it meant to truly belong somewhere. To someone. Tom lived for another 8 years after Nora's death. He saw Jack marry and start a family of his own. He watched Clara become the most respected teacher in the territory. He helped Teddy expand the ranch into one of the largest operations in Colorado. He held 6 more grandchildren and saw the first of his great-grandchildren born. And through it all, he carried Nora with him, in the way he treated people with kindness and respect, in the way he always made sure to help those who needed it, in the way he told their story to anyone who would listen, making sure everyone knew about the woman who had carried water for miles and the love they had built together. When Tom's time finally came, on a warm spring morning much like the one when he had first seen Nora at the creek, he went peacefully. His children were with him, holding his hands and telling him they loved him. His last words were, "I am coming, Nora, wait for me." They buried him beside Nora under the cottonwood tree they had planted together when Clara was born. The headstones were simple, marking the dates of their lives and the love they had shared. But the real monument to their lives was all around, in the thriving ranch, in the children and grandchildren who carried their values forward, in the well that still produced clean water, in the stories that would be told for generations. Teddy, now an old man himself, stood beside his parents' graves with his own grandchildren gathered around him. He told them the story, the one he never tired of telling, about how his mother had carried water for miles and how his father had made sure she never had to again, about how a chance meeting at a creek had changed everything, about how love, real love, was about seeing someone's burdens and choosing to share them. "Your great-grandmother was the strongest woman I ever knew," Teddy told the children, "and your great-grandfather was the kindest man." Together they built all of this. They built a family, a home, a legacy, and they did it with hard work, determination, and a love that never faltered, not once, in 41 years. The children listened, wide-eyed and attentive, already knowing they would tell this story to their own children someday, because it was a good story, a true story, a story about how two people found each other in a hard land and built something beautiful together. And far above, if such things were possible, Tom and Nora looked down at the life they had created and knew it had all been worth it. Every struggle, every challenge, every moment of doubt and fear, it had all led to this, to a family that thrived, to love that endured, to a story that would never be forgotten. The woman who had carried water for miles never had to carry it alone again. And the cowboy who had helped her found the home he had been searching for. Together they proved that sometimes the best things in life come not from avoiding hardship, but from finding the right person to face it with. Their story ended, as all stories must. But what they built, what they created together, that lived on, in the land they had tamed, in the children they had raised, in the love they had shared so generously with everyone around them, that was their true legacy, more lasting than stone, more precious than gold, more valuable than anything else this world had to offer. And it all started on a summer morning in 1878, when a cowboy saw a woman carrying water and decided to help. That single act of kindness, that simple decision to stop and offer aid to a stranger, had rippled out through time to create something extraordinary. Sometimes that is all it takes. One person seeing another person struggle and choosing to help. One moment of connection in a lonely world. One decision to stay when leaving would be easier. That is how love begins. That is how families are built. That is how legacies are born. Tom and Nora understood this, lived this, and passed it on to everyone they touched. Their story was not just about water and wells and surviving in a hard land. It was about what happens when two people decide that together is better than alone, that shared burdens are lighter, that love is worth every risk it requires. The sun set over the mountains one more time, painting the sky in brilliant colors, illuminating the Dalton ranch in golden light. The well Tom had dug with his own hands still produced clean, clear water. The house they had built together still stood strong, and the love they had shared still echoed through every corner of the land they had made their own. It was a good ending to a good story. The best kind of ending, the kind where love triumphs and family endures, and the struggle was worth it. The kind where two people found each other against all odds and built a life together that mattered. And somewhere, in whatever comes after, Tom held Nora's hand and smiled, knowing they had done well. They had loved deeply, lived fully, and left behind something that would last. What more could anyone ask for than that?